Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Turkey's election. My name is Suat Cubukcu. I am an assistant professor at Towson University in Maryland. Also, I'm a senior fellow at Orion Policy Institute. It's a pleasure to moderate this timely and important conversation on Turkey's election. And I want to thank Orion Policy Institute for organizing this event. So we have two distinguished guests today. Our first guest is Stephen Cook. Stephen is a Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies and the Director of International Affairs Fellowship for Tenured International Relations Scholars at the Council of Foreign Relations. He is a renowned expert in Turkish politics and US Middle East policy. Welcome, Stephen.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Our second guest is Suleyman Ozeren. Suleyman is a professorial lecturer at the School of Public Affairs at American University in Washington, D.C. He is also a senior fellow at Orion Policy Institute. His research interest includes Turkey-US relations, Turkish foreign policy, and international security. Our third expected guest was Sibel Oktay, but she let me today that she couldn't join today because of some health issues. So we are going to have Stephen and Suleyman. And thank you for joining us today. And I wish speedy recovery for Sibel and hope to see her in our future events. So we are awaiting excited and nervously, to be honest, Turkey's first ever run of presidential election on May 28th, which will be between President Erdogan and his main challenger, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. In the first round of elections on May 14th, none of the candidates secured more than 50% of the votes, which was needed for an outright victory. And Erdogan received 49% of the votes and Kılıçdaroğlu received 45%. And the third candidate, Sinan Ogan, who's an ultra-nationalist, came in third with 5.3%. And he today announced that he would support Erdogan in the runoff elections. So it was a twin election. It was not just a presidential, and Turkish voters also went to polls for the parliamentary elections on May 14th, and Erdogan's AKP lost 7 percentage points from 2018 elections, but the AKP still received the highest votes among the parties with 36%, and AKP alliance, People Alliance with the Nationalist Movement Party, and two Islamist parties actually won the majority of seats in the parliament. The main opposition alliance, which is the Nation Alliance, won 212 seats in the parliament. The pro-Kurdish HDP, which ran under the banner of the Green Left Party, won 61 seats. So Erdogan and his alliance will hold a majority in the parliament for 5 years, 5 more years. So this is the facts that we know at this point, and we are expecting the outcomes of May 28 elections. So, Stephen, I would like to start with you with these facts in hand and considering the dire economic conditions in Turkey, ultra high inflations that's about triple digits, and the government's poor performance in the aftermath of the twin earthquakes that happened 3 months ago. So what you consider to be the failures and the success of the main opposition? At what points was the opposition successful, and at what points did the opposition fail?
Well, I think that the opposition was successful, first of all, in unifying around a single candidate. That is something, and it is the Nation Alliance, or Table of Six, is a disparate alliance, people with very, very different views. So the fact that they were able to hold it together to oppose Erdogan is an achievement in and of itself. And I think that Kılıçdaroğlu's vote tally, 45% of the vote, or almost 45% of the vote, is a high watermark for him and the CHP. So I think those two things speak to not necessarily the skills of Kılıçdaroğlu or the skills of the party or even its message. I think it speaks to the depth of unhappiness with President Erdogan. I think that there were a number of missteps that the opposition made. First of all, losing track of, or the inability to track, at least 20,000 ballot boxes, although I've heard it's more than that, is a major misstep at a time when President Erdogan was uniquely vulnerable, and there were suspicions going into Sunday the 14th elections that there would be some effort to manipulate the ballot boxes in some way. So the fact that the opposition are opposition lost track of these ballot boxes is a major error. And then I think that the other major error was not being forceful enough when Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu basically anointed himself as the presidential candidate for the Table of Six. Now, it's true that Erdogan sort of maneuvered to pick Kılıçdaroğlu. The courts, of course, banned Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, from running on flimsy charges of insulting the judges of the Supreme Election Commission. But at the same time, in early March, Meral Akşener from the İYİ Party bolted from the coalition, basically on the grounds that she didn't believe that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu could win. And I think that she was right. And there was an opportunity for a better candidate, I think. But here we are. And there will be a runoff. And as I said, Kılıçdaroğlu was successful. 45% of voters is very, very successful. So we'll see what happens on Sunday, the 28th. Although I think you have to expect that all of the advantages go to President Erdogan ahead of this vote.
Okay, thank you. And I want to turn to Suleyman. And Erdogan consistently emphasized the importance of elections and the ballot box for democracy. Do you think the May 14th election was free and also fair?
I think being free that does not necessarily mean that it is also fair. And when we talk about elections in Turkey, obviously we need to look at the elections in three different phases. The first phase is the days and the weeks until the election day, and after the election. So basically, during the election campaigns, we see unfair ability of the ruling party and People's Alliance in terms of campaigning, in terms of using government resources, but at the same time limiting the ability of the opposition by imposing certain policies, practices that could impede or avoid them to have a free assembly and the like. I think the other issue is the media, and everyone is agreed that there is no free press in Turkey. Over 90% of the media outlets are owned by either a AKP-affiliated business or the state. So that is also another point that we have to take into account. I think one of the most effective platforms for the opposition throughout the campaign has been the social media. Even on that area, the government has tried everything to limit at least the messaging from the opposition by intimidating some of the influencers on social media. Also, obviously, the state apparatus, the police or gendarmerie and other state government agencies and organizations also have become sort of the enforcers of the ruling party in terms of imposing or oppressing some of the political parties. Especially, we see that in the east and southeastern part of Turkey. The second phase is the election day, which seems to be free. But I think the most critical point is the third phase, which is the vote count and the Supreme Board of Elections decisions. And the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe reiterated that there have been problems of transparency in terms of how the Supreme Election Board foresaw the entire process in terms of how the evaluation or of the evaluation of the petitions, etc. I want to go back to Steve's point about opposition's failure in terms of assigning observers to every ballot box. That was one of the most, in my opinion, critical points that could create some kind of resentment, disappointment among the voters who have voted for the opposition. That is the point that they at the very beginning, they said they would do everything to make sure that boxes were safe, election process would be transparent. I think that failure could be fatal in the second round of the elections.
Okay. And also, we have been observing some significant shifts in the discourse of Kılıçdaroğlu since the first round. So it became much more hawkish, nationalistic tone, right, with anti-refugee rhetoric. So especially we consider this with this Sinan Ogan's announcement that he would support Erdogan in the second round. So Stephen, what do you think that this strategy can be effective in attracting nationalist votes and potentially go to a lead for Kılıçdaroğlu and win the election? I know it's a yes or no question, but also what other strategies can actually Kılıçdaroğlu use to increase his chances to win the race?
Well, I think, let me just start on this question of him, kind of emphasizing his nationalist credentials. I think the stunning irony of this issue, particularly as it pertains to Syrian refugees, is that Erdogan essentially stole it from the opposition. It's been the opposition's position that Erdogan's policies on Syria were reckless in terms of first calling for the overthrow of the Assad regime. Of course, in a prior iteration of his leadership, he was kind of the uncle to Bashar al-Assad. And then they resented the fact that Turkey was welcoming in so many refugees, much to the actual acclaim of the international community, which had praised Turkey for what had been a relatively more organized, sensitive and caring welcome to many Syrian refugees who found homes in different Turkish cities. But when it became clear that this was becoming unpopular, especially as the Turkish economy turned, Erdogan then appropriated this issue about refugees and then sought to use the refugee issue as leverage with the European Union. I think that that Kılıçdaroğlu's kind of emphasis on this issue and trying to burnish his nationalist credentials doesn't seem to have worked very much. He sort of ran on a platform of being a less kind of bombastic leader. And even though this really is his issue and one of the issues that he's really been animated on, it doesn't really ring true. So it doesn't strike me that it's going to attract more voters. I think the best thing that the opposition can do is to count the ballots, If in fact it is the case that there are many, many ballots that were challenged and not counted, or ballot boxes that were unaccounted for, the best thing they could do is not necessarily change Kılıçdaroğlu's message. Was likely to be that Ogan was going to support Erdogan, because Erdogan has actually something to give him, whereas Kılıçdaroğlu has to satisfy 5 other groups. It seems to me that the best thing that they could do in the run-up to this runoff is to make sure that on the administrative side, that they can actually handle an election of this size. And it remains a mystery to me how they were not prepared on May 14th.
Okay, yeah. It was a kind of surprising fact. Suleyman, what else can you add?
You know that emoji? That was me with the ballot boxes. What?
And they admitted that, right? I mean, so yes. I think in terms of Sinan Ogan's decision, he got over, just like you said, over 5% in the presidential election. The party which he was a member of now, got like over 2%, the Victory Party. I think most of the votes that he got, or some of the votes that he got, has to do with the protest votes, sort of a reactionary votes, which means it doesn't matter which side he would support in the election, and he now declared that he's going to support Erdogan. I think that may not have a big impact on the 5% overall, but maybe a small portion of the vote could go to Erdogan. I think Kılıçdaroğlu's or their new strategy has some problems. One is it has its own limits, because when we look at the voters who supported Erdogan and the AKP in the first round, when those people were interviewed, their responses to the question of refugee crisis was very interesting. They blame the opposition party, which also showed that the opposition parties had this problem of messaging through the AKP, traditional AKP voters. So that is one problem or one limitation. The second one is that I think there is a chance or risk that the so-called anti-refugee sentiment could go all the way to much more nationalist, and could alienate the Kurdish voters. That is also another risk. If they overplay on this kind of narrative, they may end up losing all. So I think it is a very delicate situation and a very fragile sort of path they have to walk through.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for your takeaways and your thoughts on what's going on the field. And I want to ask some questions about the projections. So what could happen if Erdogan wins or Kılıçdaroğlu wins? So I want to turn, Stephen, to you first, especially considering the new members in the People's Alliance, especially two Islamist party, New Welfare Party and Hüdapar. So if Erdogan remains in presidency, how might this new alliance influence Erdogan's domestic agenda, especially regarding to women's and LGBTQ community rights? So what's your take on that?
It's a great question. And of course, prediction is perilous, but we know something about Erdogan's own worldviews on these issues. And so let's just take the second question I asked about LGBTQ rights. The AKP has been targeting the LGBTQ community for some time. I think the most grotesque manifestation of this was Erdogan's closing argument in the week before the voting on May 14th, in which he basically said that his opponents were gay, as if this was some sort of epithet to be thrown around. And this was a clear effort to emphasize the cultural issues, values issues, and to use them as a wedge and to weaponize them. But it's not just in this past election. With the ongoing protests at Boğaziçi University, a crown jewel of the Turkish higher education system, the AKP and Erdogan have specifically targeted the school's LGBTQ student organization that's there. So you can imagine with the addition of two Islamist and even hardline parties as part of the People's Alliance, this will likely drive this issue further in a retrograde kind of way. Erdogan is, of course, never magnanimous in victory, and he's also very clear in reading politics. Remember, this is someone who sought to negotiate a ceasefire with the PKK in 2013, but then saw some AKP votes cede away to the MHP, and then took a very hard nationalist tack in the direction of the MHP in order to secure that flank. So I don't think that he will use his partners to win and then forsake their worldviews. I think those are worldviews that he essentially shares. So I think you'll see more pressure on the LGBT community, more emphasis on religious values. I think they'll use that to weaponize against opponents even after the election. So I think it's going to be a very, very rough time for opponents of the regime across the board, but in particular vulnerable communities, because if Erdogan in fact wins, it will demonstrate that attacking these groups and others is a winning formula.
Yeah, so very concerning. And Suleyman, I want to turn to you, especially what about Hüdapar? Some argue that Erdogan will sideline these small parties and the margin parties, Hüdapar and the New Welfare Party. Do you agree? Do you think these parties will have any influence on Erdogan's domestic policies?
I think from what we have learned for the last more than 20 years is that Erdogan tends to honor the alliance, honor the members of the alliance agenda, political agenda. We saw that increasing in nationalism when he and MHP have established alliance under the People's Alliance. And in this election, they expanded the members to Hüdapar and New Welfare Party. As Stephen mentioned, obviously these parties are sharing similar political worldviews and goals. I think Hüdapar in this respect represents a unique feature. Why? Because Hüdapar is an extension or continuity of Hezbollah in Turkey, which is very different than Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the members, including the leadership, have not denied that they are, in fact, the sort of the extension or the continuity of the Hezbollah. The base, although it is very small, it is extremely marginal. Their worldview in terms of how they mobilize their mass through religion is extreme. They basically have still same mindset, worldview about how they define Kurdish issue, how they define the future of Turkey. It is very, very concerning. You know, I studied Hezbollah in Turkey. When you read all of the self-written, letters by the members, you saw that mindset clearly. And the concerning point is that I think Erdogan is going to leverage both Hüdapar and New Welfare Party in terms of seeking much more marginal domestic policies, especially it could involve women's rights, it could involve LGBTQ community, it could involve other things where the sort of Erdogan has had the monopoly over, like religion, like mosques, like issues regarding lifestyle of ordinary citizens. I think the other critical area where Erdogan could weaponize or utilize Hüdapar involves the Kurdish issue. For the last couple of decades, the HDP, now it is the Green Left Party, has had the ownership, sort of the dominant political party. It is still the dominant political party, but I think Hüdapar's, even if their vote is less than 1%, I think Erdogan could leverage their presence in the parliament, saying that there are others also to listen to when it comes to the Kurdish issue. That could polarize further the area that was, again, sort of monopolized by the HDP and, in a way, AKP.
Thank you. Stephen, you mentioned briefly about ups and downs in Erdogan's policies on Turkish-Kurdish issue. And I just want to ask you, do you expect any change if he wins the election on Kurdish issue?
No, I don't see any opportunity for change as a result of the election. I think it's clear that after 2014, he made the decision that he was going to ride Turkish nationalism and the divisions and that hard reality of Turkish nationalism and Kurdish nationalism to continuing electoral success. It strikes me that whatever moves that he might make on the Kurdish issue are purely tactical, rather than the kind of grand pronouncements that he made after coming to power in the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, investing billions of dollars in the Southeast, the ill-fated 2008, 2009 Kurdish opening, and then, of course, the negotiations with the PKK in 2013. It strikes me that those kinds of big pronouncements and strategic moves to settle one of the big conflicts in Turkish politics is now no longer possible, given everything that he has done since 2013 and given who his partners are. If his prime directive is to remain in power at this point, he couldn't possibly move from where he is now to one of those more kind of forward-leaning positions on the Kurdish issue, especially given the fact that for Erdogan, this is a relatively close call. As I mentioned in an earlier question, Kılıçdaroğlu and the opposition, for all of their failings, did quite well. And there's clearly a large number of Turks who are very unhappy with Erdogan and the AKP. So I think he's locked into these positions for as long as we can see.
So, we don't know yet Erdogan will win. So how about Kılıçdaroğlu? Do you think he will change his narrative on Kurdish issue if he wins?
Well, I think it's easier for him to do that. I think that Kılıçdaroğlu has presided over an opening within the CHP to the Kurdish issue. He was warmly received in Kurdish areas during the campaign. The HDP in this form of this Green Left Party has, offered its support. But I think that Suleyman makes a very good point. The harder you push on this nationalist issue in this interregnum between the first and second rounds, the riskier it is, because you could turn off lots of Kurdish voters and many people may be demoralized to begin with. But if he were to become the president, I would expect that he had much more room to maneuver to change the direction of Turkey on the Kurdish issues. Of course, he will not control the parliament, which will make it an even higher stakes, nastier affair to try to do that, given the array of groups that would be opposed to him. But he certainly, in theory, would be able to do something more creative than Erdogan, who seems to be locked into it. My own concern is that for his own political survival, so should Kılıçdaroğlu win, I think he would be very tough on the issue of Syrian refugees, which is his natural position, and would also have to take a very tough line on the Kurds, which is something that he's worked to undo within the CHP, but that political realities of the day would force him to renege on all of that and continue to take a tough line on that issue.
Thank you, Suleyman. You studied very seriously about the Kurdish issue in Turkey, and you were involved in the Kurdish resolution process. So, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I think for Erdogan, Kurdish issue has been one of the political agenda items that he has gained a lot of positive perceptions among the Kurdish voters up until 2014. But I think AKP realized that in 2011, 2012, no matter what they have done in terms of investment, in terms of all of the, as Stephen mentioned about billions of dollars spent in those regions, AKP officials realized that those investments have not translated into votes from the Kurdish voters. I think that was one of those moments when they realized that they needed to try other things. I have been part of the resolution process in 2009 and also a part in the second one. Throughout those processes, one of my observations has been the AKP officials have been, some of them were sincere about the outcome and the entire processes. But I think obviously they are the politicians and they have to make political calculations in terms of the outcomes. And another critical point, in my opinion, is that instead of working with the HDP officials, MPs in the parliament, they chose to work with Erdogan and especially the MIT, the National Intelligence Agency. Naturally, they chose to work with Öcalan and the PKK leadership throughout those initiatives, openings, resolutions, whatever you want to call it. And they all failed. And suddenly Erdogan realized that those processes hurt him in the long run. So he turned to the natural base, which is nationalism and nationalistic base. I think under these circumstances, if Erdogan wins, I don't see any prospect of new initiative, new resolution, because in a way, Kurdish resolution is not an independent, issue. It is part of a bigger title of democracy problem in Turkey. So unless Erdogan decides to go back to revitalizing of democracy, rule of law in Turkey, I think that he's going to stick with the nationalistic stance and position.
Oh, great. So now I want to move on from the domestic agenda to the foreign relations, Turkey's foreign relations. And I know this is a kind of the areas that both of you are expert on these, and you wrote so much about it. And especially considering an anticipation that Erdogan will win, what can be the differences in his policies, especially the US and Turkey relationship? So Steve, do you have any kind of expectation that there's going to shift in Erdogan's narrative and position with the US?
Well, I think the only real change that strikes me that may be in the offing is that if Erdogan wins and if he wins, he will treat it as if he has a broad mandate from the Turkish public, that as if there was no 2 rounds ever, and that, you know, he won a vast majority of people. And that will, I think, encourage him to change his tone with the United States. Rather than asking for a reset in relations, he'll demand one. And say, you know, it's a vindication and that this is in the Turkish national interest. But of course, he's never been one to defend the U.S.-Turkey relationship. So once again, this is sort of a political move on his part to say that he has this mandate and that, you know, F-16 should be forthcoming, that F-35s is a crime, that being is a punishment that does not fit the crime of buying a weapons system that everybody warned him would have consequences should he proceed with the purchase of it. Essentially, when the Turkish officials arrive in Washington asking for, perhaps even in the future demanding a reset, what they want is the United States to accept Turkey's position and perspective and policy prescriptions on a variety of important issues. I don't think that Washington is willing to do that. I think that certainly the Biden administration, should Erdogan win, is going to have to accommodate itself to Erdogan. And I think that there are some benefits for that Turkey provides in the Ukraine conflict. I think the grain deal is a perfect example of that. And that if we do need an interlocutor with Vladimir Putin, President Erdogan is the perfect candidate for that, given the fact that despite significant differences on a range of issues, the two men have been able to work together on a number of other issues. So I think that there will be perhaps a change in tone. But I think what the Turkish leadership tends to forget is that we do have different parts of our government. And given the kind of unnecessarily aggressive posture that Turkey has taken on a variety of issues in at least the last 10 years, you've gone from a situation in Washington where where everyone wanted to be a friend of Turkey, to a situation now where it's very hard to find a friend of Turkey on Capitol Hill. And as we can see from the CATSA legislation, we can see from what's happened with the F-35 and the S-400, Congress is now a very significant player in the U.S.-Turkey relationship. So even if the administration wants to move forward on a number of fronts that Turkey would like it to, Congress will have its say. And that's something that the president is going to have to decide, whether he wants to pick a fight with the powerful chairman in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or by being overly solicitous towards Turkey after Erdogan wins, or he wants to continue a kind of studious neutrality with regard to Turkish politics.
Thank you. And Suleyman, you know, what's your take in Turkey's foreign policy in general? Especially, I want you to give your opinion about what if Kılıçdaroğlu wins, in addition to Erdogan's perspective.
I think that is a big if, but if he wins, I think we might see certain changes in some areas and some significant changes in others, especially regarding the European Union. You know, if they honor the pledge that they made at the very beginning during the election campaign, we might expect returning back to rule of law, institutions, functioning institutions, and improving relationship with the European Union and the United States and other allies. I think there are many areas still we will see similar, not at the same level, but similar tensions, especially with the United States. But I think I look at this issue from much more like domestic first than international, meaning if there would be much more institutionalized foreign policy making process in Turkey, that means the decisions are not going to be made by one person or his inner circle, but rather through the established institutions. So that would be a big change. Secondly, I think if they would again honor their promise in terms of going back to rule of law, doing everything to achieve the EU accession process, that would resonate a very positive climate in Turkey in terms of free press, in terms of freedom of expression, again, that is going to translate into a change in the foreign policy, especially again within the European Union context. In terms of the United States, I think that, again, this positive climate could improve the relationship. At least there's going to be a welcome by the administration, or at least at the U.S. The Biden administration and U.S. Congress would have options to play with to approach the Kılıçdaroğlu administration, and I think there might be much more sort of a positive dialogue. And hopefully that positive dialogue could resonate, could translate or transform into feasible solutions to a number of issues. For example, S-400 crisis. From what I have been observing throughout the election campaign, I think we might see a positive move on that topic. Also, there is a big sort of an issue that is somewhat personal for Erdogan. It is the Halkbank case, and the Halkbank case is going to continue. I think if Kılıçdaroğlu would be elected, that might become much more, again, individual focused rather than a state-run bank that is part of the investigation. These are some areas, but overall, I would expect a positive change in the foreign policy if that is going to be connected to the positive changes at the domestic level.
Okay, Steve, you seriously studied Egypt, Middle East, and I want to turn to the Middle East and Turkey's relations with its regional countries, its neighbors, such as Syria, and also including the regional countries, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Gulf countries, and Egypt. So how do you expect a new presidency under Erdogan, and how this affect Turkey's relations with its neighbors?
It's a good question. I just want to back up one quick second and just my own view on what Kılıçdaroğlu presidency might mean for U.S.-Turkey relations. I'm not optimistic. I think that Kılıçdaroğlu is a prickly nationalist, and he leads a coalition of essentially prickly nationalists, and they've been relatively silent on what they're going to do about S-400. They haven't defended the U.S.-Turkey relationship. Kılıçdaroğlu himself was in Washington in October, and he essentially wanted to keep that trip a secret so that he wouldn't be attacked on his nationalist flank. So I'm not all that hopeful about the relationship. I think his orientation is more towards Europe and the European Union than the United States itself. So I don't see how things are going to be. I think there'll be a difference, obviously, in tone, and there'll be things that have divided Turkey and the United States in issues like the Middle East that won't be as crucial as they were. Now, if Erdogan is reelected in the Middle East, I think, look, Erdogan has not given up the fact that he sees himself as a leader in a number of different realms. And one of those realms is as a Middle Eastern leader, and the other one of those many realms is as a Muslim leader. And I don't think he's given that up. I think that his rapprochement with Saudis and Emiratis and Israelis and his hopeful rapprochement with the Egyptians is really tactical. He found the limits of his needlessly aggressive policies in the Eastern Mediterranean. Those policies produced a regional coalition arrayed against him, combined with the deterioration of the Turkish economy and his unwillingness to go to the IMF. It seemed reasonable from where he sat to go and seek relations with the Emiratis and the Saudis with their very large sovereign wealth funds to invest in Turkey and to provide some relief for the Turkish economy. That was well and good for the Emiratis and the Saudis, who now believe that they have some form of influence over Erdogan that they could not gain through the battlefield in Libya or elsewhere around the region. When it comes to Israel, I think that the rapprochement is based in part, not entirely, but in part on that kind of anti-Semitic view that Jews control Washington, and that if you spend the night in Tel Aviv, you'll have better prospects in Washington. But I think that the differences between the United States and Turkey are separate from many of the issues in the Middle East. And so I think that that was a miscalculation. And of course, when it comes to Egypt, taking Egypt off the table makes Greece more vulnerable. So I think those are the reasons for these rapprochements. And I think that you'll continue to see these types of relationships developing, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that it's a real kind of de-escalation. It's competition by other means among these different states. And I think Erdogan is fully prepared to carry through on those things. But again, it's important to remember that he really does see himself as, you know, a leader in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, and indeed the Muslim world. And that does drive him. And that creates friction with people like Saudis and Egyptians who see themselves as leaders of the Middle East and the Muslim world.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I want to turn to Suleyman. Do you have any further thoughts on that, especially Turkey-Syria relations?
I think if Erdogan wins the elections, I think he is going to continue pursuing a much better dialogue with Assad. He has been leveraging Putin to realize that, but it didn't happen. I think Assad wouldn't want to be attached to this election campaign, and but I think Syria's return to Arab League could be another opportunity for Erdogan if he could leverage, Saudi Arabia and some other countries. But I think that might be a distant story. In terms of if Kılıçdaroğlu wins the elections, I think I'm expecting a change in tone and also style. First of all, in terms of Syria, I think we will see similar tensions between Turkey and the United States vis-a-vis the Kurds in Syria. But I think the Kılıçdaroğlu himself and his political party, CHP, I think they have a better sort of chance to communicate much more effectively with Assad. Another change that I'm expecting is in the area of military activism, the Turkish military activism. Again, I don't see any change in terms of Turkey's support for some of the proxy groups, especially like the Syrian National Army. But I would imagine distancing Ankara from some of the other proxies, linked to ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates. That would be something we might expect. The refugee crisis, or the narrative, the promises about refugee crisis and how CHP and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu want to solve that crisis, all of them are depending on how they are going to navigate and somehow establish dialogue with Assad.
Thanks very much. So we have only 1 minute to finish the conversation, but I had some questions in my email box, so I'm just going to choose one of them and ask to you, because we used many ifs here: if Kılıçdaroğlu wins, if Erdogan wins. And one of the questions is, what are the chances of a peaceful transition of power if Kılıçdaroğlu wins the election? So, Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's been my concern all along. I know that Erdogan said that he would give up power if he were to lose, which I think would suggest that he feels fairly confident that he's going to win. But if he does lose by a very small amount, half a percentage point, or even 1%, he could credibly claim some sort of malfeasance, I guess. Not credibly claim, but you can imagine that he would do something like that. And I think unlike President Trump or Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, I think Erdogan would have a better shot, given the resources that he commands and the people who are so loyal to him because their power, wealth, and influence is connected to it, that he might have a better chance of staying in power if he were to lose. I think it's a scenario. It's something that I have been telling everybody who will listen to me to be worried about. And so everybody worry about it. What I would say is that I was struck when he said that he would hand over power I think some people who aren't as kind of attuned to Turkish politics, not Turkey experts, said, "Oh, well, that's good news." And I said, "Oh no, that actually means that he expects that he'll win."
Okay, Suleyman.
I think he would definitely resist and try to navigate and try to overcome that and stay in power, because losing elections for Erdogan and is not just about losing, his role as the leader of the country. That makes everyone concerned about the prospect of him not accepting or conceding the defeat. But I think there is a lesson learned from Istanbul local elections. But obviously, it is not a local election, and the person who's going to lose is Erdogan. I think it is going to be a very, very complicated process. If he continues resisting that outcome, that would be a very complicated problem for Turkey.
Thank you so much for both participating and sharing your insights and thoughts. And thank you so much for our audience. And thank you for the questions. And we appreciate your time and attention. And we will share the recorded version of our conversation on the Orion Policy webpage and also on YouTube as we expect the results of May 28th. So I hope for the best for the future of Turkish people. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.